into an even better session right now with Dr. Mariheca. Before we do that though, let me just explain to you, if you want to keep abreast of what's happening during this conference, well, you can do that using the official event hashtag. That is hashtag SAReward2020. You can use this hashtag in every tweet during the conference so that your peers can follow the conversation. Also, make sure to follow the SARA Twitter page. That is at SA_reward if you prefer to network or retweet key messages. You can go like us on Facebook. Find us there at www.facebook.com/SAReward or our LinkedIn company page, South African Reward Association. Now, once again, a big thank you to our sponsors. SARA is extremely fortunate to enjoy the support of their valued and conference sponsors and exhibitors. Without their support, presenting a quality conference to our members and other key stakeholders would just not be possible. They play an important part of the work that SARA does. I encourage you to engage with them during the conference and even after the conference, and consider what value their professional services can add to your organization. And I know many of you have done that, so thank you so much. To mention our sponsors, our diamond sponsor is ASI Financial Services. Our platinum sponsor is ShareForce. Our gold sponsors are Santa Fe Relocation, Africa People Advisory Group, and Remuneration Consultants. And then our silver sponsors, 21st Century and Kukela Consulting. Now it's my great privilege to have and introduce Dr. Mariheca. She is the OD practitioner and founder of Motto Business Consulting. She'll now be taking us through some recent case studies surrounding gender perceptions regarding reward and related strategies. Thank you, Dr. Otto, for joining us today.
Thank you, Dion. I appreciate it. It's lovely to be with you. I must tell you that this is our new norm. And I know we're meant to be used to the fact that you talk to yourself and you talk to screens and you can't see the people and the interaction isn't there. But I do want to tell you that it's still a huge privilege for me to be here, and I really am excited to share with you. So I've decided not to make use of a PowerPoint, and I've decided to actually just talk to you with my notes. So I've got everything in front of me and I'm going to talk to you as much as possible through it. So in preparation for today's session, I was thinking, okay, so if I were your shoes, what sort of questions would I like to ask? So I transformed myself into yourselves and I came up with 4 questions. So the first question is, why is this topic even important? Okay, so why do we need to talk about it? And I'm going to give you some ideas around that. And then because of everything that happens, why is it that we're not getting it right? Oversharing there. And then what will change that? What will fix it? And then finally, what are the opportunities for us in all of this? So as Dion mentioned, we've been measuring over many years, about 20 years, and that's our thing. So when we go into organizations, it's usually when there's some sort of pain point. So why do we even talk about the gender pay gap? Why do we even talk about different remuneration strategies for men and women in organizations? And the bottom line is this: if you think about women in organizations, the front of mind thing that you want to have is that there's a huge business case behind it. There are very few CEOs and MDs that are not aware of the fact that diverse teams and diverse organizations perform double as well as homogenic teams and homogenic organizations. And when we talk about diversity, we're not only talking about gender. So I just want to put it out there. But today we are talking specifically about how you pull women into those teams. And then secondly, how do you keep them? Because that is one of our biggest challenges. So I want to give you just a little bit of information around that. So what we found is, so now knowing that most of our organizations that are very diverse are very successful. One of the other things that is fascinating to me is that if you think about distressed businesses, the best CEO to run that business is actually women. And there's research that shows us that those organizations, the return on the investment is 340% to men that would have a 122% performance. And you've got to ask yourself the question then, okay, so why don't we have more CEOs? So many of you might be familiar with those facts, but the latest research of the Fortune 500 companies of this year, we've got 7.4% women, which is shocking after considering this massive business case around gender. And immediately, if you think about, okay, so why don't we have those girls in the roles? What is going on there? The first response is always to say, you know what, we just need to pay them all. And today I really want to present to you that there's maybe another option, or it's not that simple. It's not that simple, because if it was that simple, there would have been more women in those positions. So it's not the main driver. Money is not the main driver. What we get paid is not the main driver. We know this. We know this from our research. We know this from motivational strategies. So I want to delve in a little bit into those data and into those facts. So one of the very, very interesting things that also came out, why this is so important and why this has got meaning, is that what we found is that on average, okay, so in the US, it's 81 cents to the dollar. So women earn 81 cents to the dollar in terms of men's earnings. And then, so that's the one other huge motivator. And then the other thing, and in South Africa, it's actually worse. It's closer to 25% and lower. So what I want to suggest is this. If you think about this and the long-term effect that we have of women not earning the right amount of money on a monthly basis, the long-term effect in wealth loss over 40 years is absolutely disastrous for a country and for our economic well-being. So now we've got to ask ourselves the question, how do we change this? How do we change the mindset of the individuals, as in the women? Why is it that they don't want to stay there? And why is it that they are not getting, why is it that we're not getting this right? Why is it that we are not able to balance those perceptions? So, and I've given you a clue now. So one of the things that we know is that we behave according to the stories that we make up in our minds, in our frontal cortex. We behave according to perceptions. And then you've got to ask yourself the question, where do these perceptions come from? And it's actually quite simple. It's the stuff that we see, the stuff that we are exposed to, the stuff that we know, stuff that we experience. So things that are coming into us drive our thinking around something, and that gives us a story in our minds and gives a certain feeling and a certain thought, and that drives our behaviors. So if we knew what people were thinking, we could change their behaviors, right? So one of the things that we know in our measurements is that we always measure perceptions. So it doesn't mean it's true necessarily, but it's true for the individual, because they have their stories, their beliefs that they know and that they're clear about. So how are we going to make sure that those stories change so that the behaviors can change? So in other words, that we can change that massive pay gap and the gender gap, and that we can actually keep top women in organizations. So what I want to suggest is the following. So if you look at what has been done to date and what sort of action plans have been put into place, there are so many amazing organizations. And what they are doing at the moment is they're saying, right, if it is about perceptions, what are we telling people? So one of the massive drives across the world that has been started by the UN, United Nations, to promote gender equality was this WEP thing, Women Empowerment Principles. And the concept behind it is that they've got 7 items that they put on that list, and they go to CEOs of organizations and they say, okay, will you support this? Will you say that you are committed to these different items? And those 7 things then mean that they will then sign this principle document. And what they found is that absolutely it creates awareness amongst the CEOs, and there's an intent, which is fantastic. But why is it that we still have such an incredibly low senior management percentage in organizations? And what we found was that in South Africa, We have, let me just give you the facts quickly. We have our CEOs, 15%, our CEOs earns 15% less than their male counterparts. And then on average in South Africa, the women earn 30% less from their men. So that is it. If money is one of our drivers, it's definitely one of the things that we need to fix. So what Web is also pushing is that we get leaders, women in leadership. But the moment there's this story that things are not fair, how do we change it? So what is very, very important is that if you look at motivational levels and what do you find is critical to motivate people, we always say that money is important, but it has to be fair. And there's tons of data that can be looked at how do you make sure that the perception of fairness is created. So the moment there's a tick on that level, then you've got to look at other things. And those other things actually drive a lot harder and it weighs a lot more. And I want to get to that in a bit. But before we get there, so what I want to quickly just talk about is also about the 5 things that actually drive gender mainstreaming. And gender mainstreaming is driven by gender sensitivity in your language. So think about what I said earlier about the perceptions. How do we get this perception that we don't want to stay there? It is about what people say. It's about what our colleagues say. It's about what our leaders say. The second thing is women and people look at data. And what they see in the data is that, hey, wait a minute, we've just said this. You guys pay us less than what we should be paid. Okay? The third thing is equal access. And remember, it's a perception of equal access. And what we have found across the board, this is now men and women, it's different races, etc. And what we often find is if there's any sort of perception around a lack of inclusion and unfairness, it always correlates to a lack of access to training and development opportunities, or the perceptions around training and development opportunities. So whether it's a 40% lack of access, unfairness percentage, you'll have exactly the same sort of number that is related to the salary unfairness as well as your training and development access. So that's very, very important. The fourth thing that we drive when we try to change gender mainstreaming is we want to change the decision making. And this is a very difficult topic because a lot of people say, ultimately, one person needs to make the decision. One person needs to be held accountable. But what I want to push again is to say, remember, it's about female participation in decision making. So what that means is women need to feel like they're part of the decision making. And it's not just other people making decisions and we just sit and wait for other people to make the decision. So that's very, very important. So the decision-making level is critical and being part of the changes. And just by the way, that's another item that always correlates with lack of inclusivity, diversity issues, race issues, etc. And the fifth item that we want to look at when we look at changing the whole landscape around this gender pay gap is around steering processes and equality around steering processes. Now, if you think about how do we run our businesses, what you want to do is you want to create a perception where teams have women in them and they're actually involved in it. So a lot of women in senior roles, we've done multiple interviews, and a lot of women in senior roles will say, you know what, this is just a tick box thing. I just feel like a token. I'm not empowered. They don't listen to what I'm saying. I cannot make decisions. I'm not into that thing at all. I'm not doing this for my ego. I actually want to make real change. And that brings me to this whole thing about how are we going to change this? And what will actually change this? So we cannot just say, listen, let's just sign a document saying now everything will change overnight. That's not how it works. So what I also want to just touch on quickly, there's a huge story around discrimination. And remember what has happened in the past few years. This whole perception around the hashtag #MeToo sexual assault story in 2018 created a massive hype around what's really happening in the workplace. And that resulted in this story about there are too many barriers to advancement, and we have to give up so much of who we are and what we want to do to be able to stay in organizations. And therefore there's this massive exit, or people stay for a certain amount of time and then they move, they get out of the organizations. So how do we shift that? Because there has been almost no improvement of that percentage. I think in 2018, the data said 4.7% of the CEOs were at the time women. And now, like I said to you earlier, it was 7.4. So there's been a marginal improvement. And unfortunately, a lot of your senior management, all of you can speak to senior managers in work, in female workplaces, and a lot of your friends will say, and will echo this, how hard it is for a woman to have a voice and to be able to actually stay, and at what cost do they have to do this? So to get back to this whole story of gender discrimination, there was a fantastic study done in 2017 that said basically that 42% of women at the time that participated in this study, and I think it was a few hundred, like 200 people participating in this study, at the point said that they experienced gender discrimination. And I know when you look at data, when you look at stats, we know this, we see this, we talk with people, especially people in HR roles, especially people in organizational development roles and in leadership roles. We hear those stories when we're leaders and we're close to our people. And that was, in comparison, listen to this, to 25% of men experiencing gender discrimination. So it doesn't mean that men are not experiencing it. But what they were saying, was just a lot more than what women were experiencing. And then the same group said that they were, women were saying, women at the time were paid less, 20% less than what men were getting paid for that specific group. So the research is there, the evidence is there. We know there's a huge business case for us to do this, but yet we are not getting it right. And the question that we've got to ask then is, why not? And why is it that we can't get it to change? So I want to just talk a little bit about change. And I think this year has been incredibly tough for organizations across the world, for individuals. And I mean, the previous session just reiterated again why we have to have these wellness programs and why we have to look at the mental health of individuals. And something that became incredibly clear for us this year was that there's a difference between change and trauma. And 2020 was a traumatic year, and there's so much research that has been done that has shown that people have been globally traumatized by this year. Sorry, Amanda, I've got a runny nose this morning. And what we found was that because, so now you've got to ask yourself, first of all, the question, what's the difference between trauma and change? And the main difference is that trauma happens to us, and we do not have a choice in that, okay? While change is something that we choose. Now, I want to hold something to you guys that might be a little bit uncomfortable. And one of the things that I want to say to you is this. Imagine being a woman in a corporate or in the workplace where there's massive discrimination. That can be perceived as trauma, right? But if you have continuous trauma, what happens to you ultimately? And what we find is burnout occurs and disengagement, massive disengagement, where women and men, after having massive trauma and stress, just says, enough of this. I'm exiting. I'm not staying in the corporate space. I'm not climbing this ladder any longer. If I want to make real change in life and in organizations, I'll do it in a different way. So what we want to do, first of all, is we want to avoid the trauma. So we want to avoid an organization where the external environment is causing trauma for the individuals in the organization. So if we say we want to change that, what are we really talking about? And what we're really talking about is the culture of the organization. So park that, because I want to come back to that, because we need to talk about how do we change the culture of organizations and why do we even want to change it, okay? The second thing that you've got to look at is, so if I say to you, fine, we've got to change. What does change really mean? Change means that you've got to go through this deep change process. And a change process always starts, first of all, with awareness, creating awareness around what's going on. The reason why it's so painful is, and I've probably done this specific workshop around change this year hundreds of times, is, and I prefer to talk around the SARA model of change, where you talk about shock, anger, resistance, acceptance, and finally hope and healing. That's probably one of the most popular change models. And I love that change model because it relates to people that have had to let go of stuff. And a lot of us have experienced massive, massive loss this year. And this trauma and the process that we had to go through to accept this new reality of sitting behind a screen, of having to wear a mask, of having to work in different environments than what we used to. All of those changes that we all individually had to get used to and had to adapt to has been, apart from the fact, incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Traumatic, but it's also been so, so powerful in giving people understanding on what is going through, what is happening to them going through that process of change. So what I want to suggest to you is this. When you come into an organization and you realize that the external environment, the culture in that organization is not exactly the environment that is conducive to keeping specifically women in an organization and having a really diverse and healthy organizational culture. The first thing you've got to ask yourself is, how do I change that? And then you've got to say to yourself, okay, so if we want to change anything, the most important point of change that you've got to look at is the most senior person in the organization. You've got to look at the leader. Leaders drive the culture. There's a whole theory around saying that there should be, and that's also why I started off with it, there's a whole theory that says that if you put a woman leader in a CEO and an MD in a management role, that they tend to appoint more women in the organization. I'm not 100% sure that that's even true, and for multiple reasons. But that is one of the things that we know, is if you are confident in yourself as a leader, male or female, you understand the business case and the whole thinking around this, and understanding that if you can create an equal environment for women to come up into an organization, for teams to be more diverse, to empower both women and men in a business, then what will ultimately happen is you will start putting certain things in place to make that happen. So what I want to suggest to you is this. I want you to think about, how do we do this? And I've given you a clue in the sense that nothing happens without creating some awareness. So we've done a lot of research this year during this whole COVID drama, during all of these things, because we've developed this tool, a gender perception tool. And how we measure it is, so first of all, I have to admit we've made a bit of a mistake in our measurement initially, because I've been talking, since I've started talking now, I've kept saying to you, you've got to think about how women think, etc., etc. But the reality is, for women to be able to not only empower themselves in a work environment, it means that the environment also has to change, which means that the hearts and the minds of the men also has to change. So initially when we started measuring, we only looked at the perceptions, the self-perceptions of women in the workplace and how men anonymously perceive them. And after our first case study, and when we gave feedback to the men, we were blown away. And since the beginning of doing all these case studies, 3 major themes have been coming up. in each and every organization that we've been working with, we've been testing, how does this really work? And what is it that we can do to change this? So, of course, what you will find is the healthier in terms of engagement an organization is, the easier it is to get really deep into what it is that we can change on the gender space. Okay, so my advice would always be start off by first just looking at what is there's normal culture drivers. What is the engagement levels at the moment? How is it that we work? What are the stories that we know? And then you'll have at least a very good idea of what you need to work with. And there will be themes that we're coming across. So what we are able to do and what we have been able to do is we can take data from the engagement work that was done, whether it was qualitative, whether it was quantitative, whether it was our own engagement surveys that we used, and we could literally take the gender stories and plonk it onto it because it gave meaning to what was really going on here. So the way we try to create awareness with organizations since it's a start of changing the story is what we would say is, guys, when you go into an organization, why do you even enter an organization? And the reason would be that there's some sort of a pain point. There's something that's not like it. Either you appoint these really amazing, fantastically bright women and they don't stay. They last 3 months and then they go. And you can't get it. And we've spoken to multiple recruitment companies that say they want to pull their hair out because they search for these really amazing people to appoint. And then after 3 months, they say, I can't do this. I can't deal with this environment. I can't deal with this culture. So we came up with ideas around how do we help them to change that. So what we usually say is that story of we lose our top talent. We're not able to advance and get people to mentor younger women or make more inclusive teams, or we don't get participation going, or whatever the story is. That pain point usually triggers waves. So in my mind, it's like an iceberg. And in this iceberg, on top of it, there's lots of noise. The waves are just like going crazy. And the noise is usually either our business is not successful enough or we're losing our top people. And we're not getting this benefit that I said to you earlier about the 340% return on investment. And what shareholder wouldn't want that? Okay. So there's this sense of noise of, guys, you as a leadership team, as directors, as owners, as whatever the story is, we are not really getting this right. So the noise then says, okay, so let's just take away some of the noise. And the first step would say, okay, let's just look at our culture and let's just look at, what are our current engagement levels? And as we know, the moment you move the stats from just having satisfied employees, so what is a satisfied employee? That's that basic thing of, I get money, I do my job. I show up for my work and I call them passengers, okay? When somebody is not negative, so they're not rowing against the stream, they're really there on the boat, but they are just cruising. They are just in the space and doing what they need to do. Yesterday, I had a conversation with a senior manager at one of my clients, and I said to her, okay, tell me about your leader, tell me about your team. And she says to me, you know what? It feels like I've got no, she said, I have half a team. Because I asked her, why are you struggling? Why are you so overwhelmed? Why are you so tired? Why is it that you're getting sick? Because that was one of the things that came up from her specific individual data. And she said to me, Mariheca, you know what? I've got half a team. And I thought, what? How can I give her half a team to work with? But what she meant was half of a team are passengers. Half of a team is just there and they are satisfied because they're showing up for work, but they're not there. They're not engaged. So what we know is the minimum improvement in performance and productivity and they Google engagement effects and you will see the data. Okay, because I can't remember the specific piece of research, but I know for a fact that anything from 17-18% to around 40%, even close to 50%. If you can move your data from satisfied, in other words, I show up, my absentia levels are okay, and I get paid, to having engaged staff is already 18 to 40, 50% improvement. Okay. Now, what you want is you want that bunch that actually is part of the process they're rowing to really be inspired. And when you move that set of data from engaged to absolutely inspired, there's another 50% improvement in performance. So now you've got to ask yourself, how are you going to move that? That's what you should be interested in as a leader. That is where you start saying, okay, so how do I move that? And the answer is in the following. And it's hard for me to talk about these things without seeing you guys, because I would have loved to get your views on this. So to move people from being engaged to being inspired takes leadership. And leadership means you've got to step out of your ego. And you've got to put yourself in a space where you feel vulnerable and you can truly engage and connect. So to go back to my conversation I had yesterday with that manager, I said to her, why is it that you feel like you've got half a team? And she said to me, there's no connection. There's nothing we've got in common. I just can't. And she basically wanted to say, I can't see them and they can't see me. And this is where I want to get to. So if you really want to change the environment, if you really want to shift all this hectic data of how incredibly bad it is for people, I want to share with you, how do you go really deeper? So if I can go back to my iceberg analogy. So if you can say, okay, guys, we've heard you. We hear all the noises around what pushes us away and why is it so hard and all the stuff that's just wrong in this business. So why I cannot move and I cannot show up from just being what do you call it? Somebody that's just a passenger to somebody that's engaged. So if you remove that noise, you want to go deep and you want to delve deeper. So what we did is we measured, okay? And we measured incredibly inclusively. The way we measured was as followed. We said, boys, you're going to do some what is the word I'm looking for? We've got to create some self-awareness, okay? So you've got to have some self-reflection. So we were able to give each and every male participant a report that gave them an idea of how they feel about the workplace as a man on these 50 items. And what is it that they see in themselves that's holding them back? What is it that, how do they perceive themselves on various things, like my own purpose and my own passion, which, by the way, to what extent is it aligned with the organizations or not? Because that's a real motivator, okay? Secondly, we had to look at things like, and we did exactly the same thing for women on their own, self-perception of women around what they struggle with as a woman in the workplace. And the reports they received spoke about those things, but either as a man or as a woman. And it was mind-blowing, because what came out was the contrast, not only with what these people are struggling with, what the men in general, so here we go into generalizations and averages now, and the women in general, because that's what we could do. We could take the average scores of how women felt and how men felt, and we could compare them. And we could say, okay, that's fascinating, because individuals have individual struggles. No size fits all, because you've got to start asking yourself the question, what will change it? And the answer is, it's about self-empowerment. It's about looking at the individuals. It's allowing them to see what's going on for them. Okay, so like I said, purpose and passion came up. We look at our second construct is all about looking at what is it that I have that I can offer? What is my product that I bring to the marketplace? What is it that I've got to give? Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. What is it that I've got to give? And how do I feel about that? And a lot of those items relates to confidence. So here's the interesting bit. On average, across the board, men are far more confident, surprise, surprise, than women. And we know this. This is how we are wired. Men are wired from millions of years ago to be confident, to go out and go and hunt. That's the old story. That's why our brains are wired like that, to get up and go. Women are not like that. Women are far more wired to be inclusive, to doubt, to say, oh, maybe I don't know, because they had to be part of a team that needed to do stuff in a different way. And because women have been the primary caretakers of children, so they had to be far more relatable in that sense. It is also, unfortunately, part of our main three things that came out. So the first thing that I want to share with you that relates to that was, women don't ask for what they are worth because they do not have the confidence always. Their confidence are lower. They doubt themselves far more, which is not a bad thing if you think about an inclusive environment, if you think about a vulnerable, safe environment. It's a wonderful thing because you come in with a question, not with certainty. So you create this incredibly safe environment. Now, what also came out from the data is the third construct, which is all about talking about how do we feel about what we are worth and what we've got to offer. Now, why is that important? And the guys in the previous session touched on it. It's all about saying, okay, so if it is true that my self-worth is very much related to my self-esteem, and I have a poor self-worth or a poor self-esteem, as a woman and as an individual, I will struggle to set boundaries, to say no, to ask for what I need, and to ask for what I'm worth. And there are many other things that we look at, but those few things were so clearly different from what we saw in men. Men's data were almost the opposite of what we saw in women. The self-worth measures that weren't great was more related to not wanting to be vulnerable and not wanting to ask for help. But it was not about asking for what I want. And that is often related to money. So this is a huge, huge thing that we can actually change. And I'm super excited about it. Because if you think about it, to learn to ask for what you want, which is different from what you need, okay? Because wants are often related to the ego and external things. And needs are far more related to what is it that's going to make me the most successful person that I can be. So it's critical for your own well-being and it's critical for your progression in organizations. And what we know is if people struggle with that, they will hold themselves back. So one of the things that I must be very honest with you, I've struggled with when we started embarking on this journey. So last year I was asked to talk at an HR in Durban and St. Santon, and I had to sit on a panel with other really, really amazingly successful women around female leaders and women in leadership. And when I was asked to join that conversation, I was blown away with what the questions were from the audience. I was completely naive and I was completely, maybe in denial, I don't know, just totally ignorant and oblivious to what the real struggles are of individuals. And I think the reason is because I've been working for myself for more than 20 years now. And it's so different when you work for yourself than when you work in a team. Yes, I also find all the same struggles when I go and I present to organizations and other clients where there might be a lot of discrimination because I'm a woman, etc., etc. And I mean, one of the main reasons why I decided, and this is maybe oversharing, why I decided to do my PhD in my 20s already, was because I knew if I wanted to consult in organizations, which means you want to come in and tell other people what to do, that would be what my children would say, then what happens? You are so at risk Because you come in and they think, who do you think you are, girl? You're a young female and you want to come and tell me what I should be doing in my business. And I did my PhD. And of course, a lot of this came from the data, and a lot of this over the past 20 years came from the development in the space and how you get people to engage and how you get people to buy into vision, because that's what the PhD was about. But the reality was, my thinking was, if I do not want to work in a corporate space myself, and if I'm honest to myself, why not? Because as a student, I used to temp at a corporate, and I looked at that mess and I thought, what is this how they perceive me? Because I like wearing high heels at the time, and I like looking really good, and I like to be, presentable. I get perceived as a puppy, or I get perceived as just a girl, and my opinion counts less than my male counterparts. And I looked at them and I thought, I'm not interested in that, and I'm not interested in the internal politics and how to play this game, because ultimately that's what we end up doing. You choose whether you want to play that game or not. And every organization dictates what the rules are to the game. Now you've got to ask yourself, what are you talking about, girl? So there are two different things we talk about here. The one is, do you have policies and procedures in place? And our legislation and the legislation of the majority of the world dictates that women are protected, that they don't get discriminated against, that they talk about what they call, and I just want to get my data here, not to lie to you guys, but what they talk about is they say that there's a controlled group. So what that means is similar jobs, similar qualifications. The pay gap is tiny, it's 2%. It's nothing. It's nothing. And I would say that pay gap difference is because women, first of all, they go out of their roles and they come back once they've had kids. And there's a thing that says you get a bit of a pay cut, but around 7%, sorry, you drop in your overall salary around 7%. So you miss out, okay? So your annual growth and your annual wealth creation over a period is about 7%, okay? So that's like a penalty for having children, they call it. So, but in the control group, because there are rules, the pay gap is much better. But that doesn't mean their retention strategies are better. It doesn't mean that people are successful in those organizations, or the organizations are inclusive and diverse, and they get those wonderful 340% return on investments. So what we also know is in the uncontrolled, so in other words, in the organizations, the normal stuff, okay, where it's not legislated, it's not controlled by policies and procedures, where it's just in general, and they look at organizations and businesses and hospitals and schools, all professions and roles, it is dismal, okay? And in South Africa, we know it's around 25-30%. So, and then you've got to ask yourself, what the heck? Because we've got fantastic legislation that is in place. Why is it that we're not getting it right? Okay. So what I would like to do now is I want to talk about some of the opportunities here. And I touched on it now by saying to you guys, if you want to change the rules of engagement in an organization, those things are called norms and values. Values are chosen. Norms are unconscious. And then we get to talking about unconscious bias. And the reason why we measure self-perception is because we need to make individuals aware of the fact that they might be holding themselves back, or they might have issues that they're not dealing with, and how they are showing up creates this environment that's not conducive to an inclusive environment. So if I can jump back to our data that we've received, these were the three things that came out. So first of all, I mentioned to you, women don't ask for what they're worth. They don't ask, and it is supported by the rest of the constructs. I mentioned to you before, it's our purpose and passion, it's about confidence and how we show up and how we come across and how we position ourselves. So remember, confidence is learned behavior. And that's why it's so incredibly important to have mentorship processes in place. And I'm not only referring to older women mentoring younger women. I'm talking about men mentoring younger women. of different races, different diverse backgrounds, diverse capabilities. Because the reality is that's the only way we're going to be able to change the landscape. We find that mentorship processes is your best retention strategy. It's also your cheapest, by the way. So if you want to talk about mentorship processes, give me a call. We've got so much data over a period of 20 years where we've actually monitored individuals on this process, both men and women. Okay, so let me not get totally distracted. So we spoke about confidence, that's learned behavior. So it's about knowledge and experience. Then we spoke about self-worth, and that's a much deeper thing. That is about who you really are. And unfortunately or fortunately, it is about how you grew up and where your story comes from and what you believe about yourself. And you can only change those beliefs if you start becoming aware of them. And how are you going to become aware of them? That they are the ones that's holding you back if you don't do something actively. Okay. So the third and the other constructs are all in support of these different ones. And they talk to communication and conflict management and how we show up. And it was fascinating because what we found was that women are, of course, far more inclusive in their communication, perceived by men, but women don't always see that. So women in general have rated themselves lower on all items than what men have rated themselves. And on most items, men, in healthy organizations, by the way, men have rated the women higher in how they perceive them. So that blew me away. Because we expected at least some of the organizations to have men that are just complete, I want to swear people, men that discriminate against women. But we found that the majority of men, women listen to this carefully, are not discriminatory. They don't have an issue with girls. They are just into their own game. They just want to make it for themselves. They're looking out for themselves. That's what it's about. So then what we also found was, and this is for me one of the best things that I thought was absolutely fantastic, is that women, and this is one of the reasons why you want women in a team, why you want a diverse and inclusive organization, because those organizations are far more innovative. Double as innovative as organizations that don't have it. And if you think about what 2020 did to us and what they did, the 2020 did to the world, the organizations that are thriving during this hectic pandemic are the ones that could adapt with innovative and creative thinking ideas. And so what we found was men perceive women to be far more innovative, far better at problem solving, far more creative than themselves. And they perceive them to be the ones that can bring the real change. How's that? And contrary to that, women know this. They know they can solve problems. Most women run households. Most women can juggle stuff and do different things at the same time. Our brains as women are just wired like that. That is what we do. That is how you cope. You get a phone call from a teacher, you get a call from a client, you get a call from a director to do the same thing at the same time. And you've got to figure out what to do. And women are phenomenal to say, okay, this first, then this, then this. It is amazing. And we know this about women. Okay, so but there's a one big problem, and that is women don't participate. They doubt their own innovative and creative ideas. And that is the big bugger up. So if I can do anything today is to stress that how incredibly important that is. So the third thing that came out, so it's not asking for what we want and not asking for what we need. So not asking for what we're worth, okay? Very important. The second thing that came up is this innovative thing that will kill a business, okay? And the third thing is, and it's also, so problem solving and how we see problem solving is one of the constructs we look at. We also look at coping mechanisms. We look at how do we connect with others. And this is now where, and support structures that we create for ourselves. How do we create balance and how do we create calm for ourselves and how do we create healthy environments? What women are able to do is they look at themselves and their own lives, and at some point they say, hey, this is not worth it, I'm going to pull out. My family is more important, my health is more important, I am out, okay? And this is part of the reason why we sit with that 7.4% story. And this is part of the issue, is that most females at some point say, I don't need this for my ego. I don't need this for my family. I need to be healthy and balanced and okay. And I don't have to have the most money in the world. And they don't go for those positions. So this is so important. What also happens is, the third thing is, there's not enough female support for females. Now you're going to say to me, what? And this is what I want to say to you. What we found is, when you speak to women as individuals, because it came out consistently, and I'm still day to day, I'm still seeing it, where women say things like, yeah, especially your senior and upwards, they say, nah, I don't belong to groups like that. I don't need that in my life. And then you ask, what do you mean you don't need that? So first of all, they will say to you, I've got to look after myself, my family, and my community first. Okay? For me to create space to belong to a group of like-minded women that can help me is last priority. Not even to mention getting a coach or a mentor. Okay? Female mentor, female coach that can help you to deal with some of these challenges. So what we found is that often women feel that other women feel threatened either by them or they feel threatened because they feel that they're going to be judged by their own. So they go and they relate easier to men, and they find it's easier to connect with them almost in a, and we know this one, don't let me now feel guilty because I'm sharing a secret that we all know, but women are incredibly good at manipulating men because they know to what extent most men are driven by egos. And for us to see the men as an equal is hard. And it's incredibly hard to say, okay, maybe this individual also wants to connect with me just because who I am. And the same with the women. So we struggle with that. We struggle far more with our own gender than we struggle with the opposite gender, ironically, okay? And this is part of changing that whole culture. So what I would like to do in the last few minutes that I've got is I would like to talk about what are the opportunities that we have with everything that I shared with you. This whole story about the other big issue that I just also want to point out what we found. And it's hectic. I mean, we know. So a few things that really shocked me this year was that 2/3 of two of the 3 million, and that was the stats in April, right, of people that lost their jobs were women. What is the economical impact? What is the societal impact of that? Okay, that brings us a massive opportunity. As employers, the layoffs and the rebuilding, when you rebuild, when you start restructuring organizations, and we've helped so many organizations the past few months restructuring, the reason being it gives massive opportunity for to employ diverse teams, not just in terms of gender, but in terms of race, age, huge thing. Having people from different age groups is critical. Your millennials and your Generation Z and your boomers and your X's, they think differently, they behave differently. You want that. You want different kinds of youth. So first of all, I want to say, when you employ, come in with the whole idea of maybe we need to employ for diversity and differences. That's what we've got to employ. The second thing that I want to encourage you guys as leaders and as HR practitioners to create, in order for us to create an inclusive organization, remove the obvious stuff, remove the barriers to entry, but you will be surprised what the real barriers to entry is. So I want to suggest you find out, ask the people. So one of the things that we also do, so I told you we measure and we look at how individuals see themselves, and we took those combined data and we compared it, but we also looked at how they perceive the opposite gender, okay? And that was fascinating for us, because what we found is that the barriers to entry sat there. The perceptions about the other created those barriers. So I really, really strongly want you to look at these things, pause, don't just go and, you know, I've heard interesting things around people opening a crèche because now this is going to help people, or whatever it is. Talk to the individual. Let them create some self-awareness for themselves on what it is they need, and identify that they do not have the skill either to ask, to step up in meetings with innovative ideas, or whatever the story is. So very, very importantly, for us to be able to move forward, and I quickly just want to go back to my whole thing about how do you motivate? No size fits all kind of thing. There isn't something like that when you talk about changing this landscape. You have to have both. You have to have individual development processes as well as group development processes. And what am I talking about? The two main things you're going to be driving is functional relationships, and we suck at it. We are so bad at building relationships. We struggle with it because we're stuck in our egos. We struggle to grow into that vulnerable space. But for us to do that, you have to first become aware of how you're showing up. Okay. The second thing that I want to quickly just say to you is this. If you think about it, we cannot change this landscape if we do not have what we call quality conversations. Quality conversations means I am able to ask for what I need. I'm able to share what I'm thinking. I'm able to just move into an emotionally and psychologically safe space to be able to create an environment where people are able to deal with their own biases, to be able to ask for what they need and be able to connect. Because that's ultimately why we're working together as human species. It's our survival mechanism. So very importantly, nothing can really change if you don't know what's going on in the minds and the hearts of people. If you are not aware of what the true perceptions are of the individuals that's working for you or that's working with you, you are not going to be able to shift the stories. And then you will, which means you will not shift the behavior. And a year from now, I will talk to you about marginal improvements. And it's probably not going to be in appointments, yeah, but not in retention and not success. So I really strongly want to encourage you to say, what is it that we can do? What is it that we need to do? And maybe there's opportunity in your organizations or in organizations, even your suppliers or other organizations where you can have these conversations. Because the reality is we're not going to change the world alone. We have to go deeper. It's that iceberg story. We have to go into what is really going on, and on an individual level, and then in a team level, and then finally in an organizational level. So we have to have that up, down, up approach instead of the top down approach. I hope that made sense to you guys. I really, really enjoyed sharing the information. I still find it incredibly weird that I'm talking to myself. I think my children think I'm completely nuts, but it was fun. And I'm just scanning my notes to check if there's anything else. Oh, just one more thing. One of the things that also happened during this year, and you guys know this, was gender-related violence. And one of the things that we started doing is we started partnering with wellness organizations to say, when you find there's something like that with one of your employees in the organization, use these tools, not just for the one party, but for both, because it's needed to be unpacked on an emotional level, on a social level, an environment level. It's not going to change overnight. So to deal with that trauma, you have to include both parties. It's the only way you can move forward. So when you have a counseling session, whether it's a trauma session or whatever it's called, you have to make sure that both those parties are included in the conversation, and then further action can be taken. So thank you so much. I really appreciated being with you guys. I hope that I've given you some data that you can work with and some stories that you can work with. And I look forward to checking in. And if there's any questions, you're welcome to let me know.
Dr. Atta, thank you so much. Wow, that's all I can say. What a passionate presentation and very, very interesting indeed. And also, thanks for highlighting the fact that us men just cannot multitask. You made that point loud and clear. I have to say, though, I can chew gum and ride a bicycle. So that's my claim to fame to multitasking. Thank you.
Well done, Dion.
Right, we've got a couple of questions. I think I'm going to ask you if you can log on to the platform just now and see if you can get to the other questions. But I'll ask you one question in the meantime. is from Professor Mark Busson. He says, I've recently been asked to include the LGBTQ as a diversity clause in a board constitution. Do you have any experience or any exposure to that?
I find it so interesting, because I read a fascinating book recently on those items, and it's difficult because I think people have got to be so careful, making a lot of noise and not really seeing the person. So, and putting people in boxes for the sake of putting people in boxes. So, I think if you want to put a policy in place, put a policy in place. My view of that is that ultimately you're working with the individual, you're working with the other person, and you're still going to have the conversation around that. We also, because that was one of the questions that one of our clients asked us and said, listen, if somebody doesn't want to do the girls survey or the boys survey, what do they do? And we've got a similar sort of tool that measures the same items, but just as an individual. We also have now embarked on a disability tool where we talk about self-perceptions on disability, and the same thing goes there. Ultimately, we are human beings in the workplace. So how can we tackle these challenges? By showing up as human beings and having the difficult conversations.
Absolutely. I'll ask you another one because I see they still got us on there. Comment here, great, frank, and natural discussion. If there was one thought you would leave with men, what would that be?
It's so funny, because I was asked that question last year, and it was like when I embarked on this whole thing. And this is going to shock you, but this is honestly what I think. I've got 3 boys, okay, and I've got a girl. I grew up in a family with 3 brothers. I've got mostly boy cousins, okay. So I come from a very much male-dominated environment, how I grew up and whatever. And it's possibly why I'm also very passionate about this. And what I say to my boys is, don't come with stories about girls are different, boys are different. Of course they're different. Individuals are different. Think like a feminist. And feminism means we're all equal. It's not the one is better than the other. Think like a feminist. Okay, so, and the moment you sort of get comfortable with that idea of what, then you're there. Okay, boys, think like a feminist.
I'm going to try. I really am. I've got my colleague Eileen sitting next to me here, and she was giving me the eyes. So I think I'm going to try it like a feminist. There are some other questions. We're not going to get into them right now. I'll read you one comment. Organizations, this is from Johan van der Westhuizen. Organizations evolving from good to great integrate women at all levels of leadership. So yeah, thanks so much, Johan, for that comment. And we just like to say, Dr. Otto, thank you so much for your time, the passion and the energy that just exuded from that presentation. Absolutely amazing. You've been fantastic. We'll see you again later. Thanks so much for that. Before we conclude this morning's session, just to say thank you to our sponsors, our diamond sponsor, ASI Financial Services, our platinum sponsor, ShareForce, and then our gold sponsors, Santa Fe Relocations, Africa People Advisory Group, and Remuneration Consultants, and also our silver sponsor, 21st Century and Kokela Consulting. Now, before you log off, remember I said there's competitions that's going to be happening and prizes given away. So it's competition time, and it's time for a lucky draw sponsored by Kokela Consulting. So once again, I brought Eileen in here because she is going to help me draw the winner. And let me tell you what you can win. You can win a Harman Kardon Citation 1 MK2 speaker valued at 5,000 Rand. And this is proudly brought to you courtesy of Kokela. Thank you, Kokela, for that amazing prize. Now, the winner is, and I hope you're still on, let's get that name. Eileen, if you can come in here. Everybody say hi to Eileen. Right, our winner for today is Mr. Chris Martin. Thank you so much, Mr. Chris Martin. Congratulations, you won yourself that Harman Kardon Citation 1 MK2 speaker, valued, like I said, at 5,000 Rand. Well, folks, that concludes our morning session. Please connect with each other on the platform, chat to our sponsors and speakers, and we'll see you again later at 3 o'clock. Cheers.